Hi, Coach Dalton over here with Mathicists. I was just preparing my next video lecture. I'd like it to be about triangles, but while I was doing that, I just started thinking about a a problem that a lot of my students over the years have claimed to have with with these tests, with the SAT, with the ACT, with really any standardized test. And this doesn't just apply to the math section. This is any timed test. Is they will say that they have a timing issue. Is how they will self-diagnose the problem. And I'll just say this right now. I don't think your problem is timing. If your problem were time, I feel like this is what the scenario would be. You would move through the section, and just to do each problem just takes a long time to solve, and there's just not enough time that they give you to answer all the questions. That is what a timing issue is. And I understand. Hold on, just listen for a second. I understand that that's what you think is going on. But indulge me for just a for just a moment here. Indulge me. Let me just paint you a little picture, an alternative scenario of what I think might be happening, and you can tell me, if it sounds familiar or anything. You're moving through the math section. First page, easy problems, no big deal. Second page, little bit harder, but we're still on easy mode. We're still in the first half, no big deal. Maybe one question kind of gave you like a bit of a jump, but you reread it and it's like, oh, never mind. I get what to do now. It's not that bad. But let's face it, sooner or later, you reach a question that, you know, like stumps you. You reach a question that you just don't know what to do. You might say, I have no idea what to do with this question. Now, don't even get me started on that crap. I hear that all the time. I had no idea what to do on this question, so I just guessed. This is going to be a topic for another video, but do you mean that you had literally no idea? Or do you mean that you had some ideas, but just weren't 100% sure that they were the right thing to do? And if you're not 100% sure, then you don't do anything. That's the way you live your life. You would never make pencil marks on a paper unless you were 100% sure you were doing the right thing. I'm not going to just try stuff out on the page. Topic for another pep talk. Anyways, I'll indulge you on that for a moment, though. You reach a question that you have no idea what to do on, and you stare at it. And a minute goes by, and you're still staring. Now, why aren't you just moving on to the next question? Well, because that feels icky, doesn't it? To move on to the next question. It makes you feel like you're giving up, doesn't it? It makes you feel like a loser. It makes you feel defeated, like you're giving in to the defeat. I get it. I feel that too. When I move through a math section and I get to a question that's just not happening for me right at that moment, I hate the feeling of moving on. I want to do each question in order because that's prettier, right? They gave me the questions in order. I don't want to move on to the next one until I've done all of the previous ones in order. Isn't that the way we should do things? Look, all the questions are numbered in order. I should do them in order, right? So I can't move on to the next one yet. I don't want to give up. It's going to make me feel like I'm giving up. I don't like that feeling. Is this sounding familiar at all to you? Because if so, it doesn't sound like you have a timing problem. It sounds to me like you have a stubbornness problem. It sounds to me like you value the feeling of doing everything in the right order and the feeling that you're not giving up. You value those feelings above your score. You value those feelings above ultimately having enough time to do all the questions. Look, when a question is not happening, we have to be strong. We have to just move on. And it's not like we're abandoning it forever. This is the best part about moving on from a question when it's just not happening and getting better at knowing when you're in that situation more quickly. Because you don't want to just, after 5 minutes of staring at a question, finally go, okay, it's not happening right now. You want to recognize that a little sooner. I would say if a minute goes by and you've made no progress, that means that question is not happening right now. That means it's time to move on. And I get it. It doesn't feel good. But if you're disciplined about doing that, about moving on, you will have more time overall. And you'll have time left over after you finish all the future questions. And you can use that time to go back to the questions that weren't happening before. And it's going to be a much more comfortable headspace to be in to do those questions that you skipped before. Because let's compare these two scenarios. If you're just so anal and self-indulgent that you just have to do everything in order, you get to a question that isn't happening at that moment, but you just force yourself to just stare at it anyway for 5 minutes. The awareness that there's a whole second half of the section left to do is going to start to creep into your consciousness. And you're going to be increasingly aware that, oh gosh, and this problem, I still don't know how to do this one, and I still have all these other problems to do, and that is not a good headspace to figure out a question you don't know how to do. Whereas, if you identify that question as one that's just not happening right now, I'm going to go ahead and move on and do everything else first, then I'll come back to this one. When you go back to this one, maybe there's 1 or 2 questions or 3 questions throughout the section that you temporarily left behind to finish the other ones. Now you can tell yourself, okay, well, I still have to figure out these questions, but I have the rest of the time to do just these couple questions. I've done everything else. And now I can comfortably devote the rest of my time to that. Doesn't that sound like a mindset, a mental space that's much more conducive to actually being able to figure things out rather than just freaking out? Of course it does. And hey, I get it. Okay? How do you think I feel? I've been teaching these tests for over 10 years, and when I take a new practice test, sometimes I reach a math question that is just not happening for me at that moment. And I hate the feeling of moving on. You think you feel defeated when that happens. You should hear what happens in my head when I see a question that's just not happening for me at that moment. You should experience 1/10 of the shame that I feel when that happens. But I have to be my own coach. And I remind myself what I preach. And I say, hey, we'll have time to go back to this one, but we just got to move on for now. It's just not happening right now. And sometimes doing later questions, by the way, will sort of jog your memory about what to do for that earlier question. Maybe that earlier question that you are going to skip because it's not happening right now, maybe it was like a question about special right triangles. I got triangles on the brain because I'm prepping this triangle lecture. Maybe it's a question about special right triangles, but it wasn't really obviously about special right triangles. They're very good about obscuring the special right triangle stuff on this test. So you couldn't see it at the time. But maybe a later question was overtly about special right triangles, was obviously about special right triangles, and you knew how to do that one. And then in the process of doing that one, it clicked. And you're like, oh, that early one's a special right triangle problem. So there are real tangible reasons to be skipping and going back. Like sometimes just the act of doing later questions will remind you of certain math things that may be relevant for that question that just wasn't happening at that moment. And also just taking a break from the question, even if you don't do a later question that, gives you an idea, just taking a break from the question, getting some emotional distance from the question will often help you to see it in a new way when you come back to it. Sometimes I'll be stuck on a question and I'll reread it a few times and it just still is not happening for me at that moment. Then I'll go back to it after 10 minutes of doing other questions and I'll read the question again and I'll say, oh, I reread this like 3 times before and I still never noticed this one word here that changes everything. So just taking a little break from it, getting some emotional distance can really go a long way. So I just want you to ask yourself, is it a timing issue that you have? Or is it a stubbornness issue that you have? And I'd also like to add, a lot of you are very good at math in general. Like at school, you're good at math and you're smart, right? And you're not seeing the top tier scores on your SAT or ACT that in your heart. This is the heart. In your heart are would be truly reflective of your intelligence, of the abilities of your mind. Um, and you've always been so smart, so you're struggling with how to make the scores show that. I say this because I find that people who are smart, people who do well on math tests at school or whatever, they're actually at a disadvantage when it comes to the stuff that I'm talking about right now because they're actually, you're actually, we're actually not that used to the feeling of having no idea what to do on a math question. That's not something we have a lot of practice in dealing with. So when we do encounter a math question that stumps us, and you will, this is the SAT. You think these people are fucking around? They know how to make questions that stump smart people. Okay? That's literally their job. Um, so we're not used to that feeling of having no idea what to do in a question. So we have no psychological ability to sort of cope with that experience. And it lowers our confidence, it makes us freak out, and it makes us, that's part of where the stubbornness comes from, by the way, because we're so used to being able to do well at school where there's all these straightforward math tests that it's almost like a part of our identity is dying if we skip a question in the math section, right? Like, oh well, I always know how to do all the math questions. Like, if I'm skipping this question, who even am I? So I ask you once again, is it a timing issue you have, or is it a stubbornness issue that you have? Look in the mirror, okay? I'll talk to you later.